I'm delighted to welcome our last speaker of the day. Debi Kleiman is Executive Director of the famed Arthur Blank Center for Entrepreneurship in Babson. She is also herself an award-winning marketer, educator, and now author of a book on pitching. And I think, as you'll hear from her, what is important as we think about this is that pitching is not just to the Eric Paleys of the world, but is how you'll convince your teammates to join you, your customers to buy your product. I know Debi has deep, deep expertise on this, and we have a very short time. So I will welcome her to our Zoom stage and encourage you all to be engaged on Q&A. Debi, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm just going to pass over to my presentation for today. It's really exciting to get to talk to all these wonderful MassChallenge startups. I remember the very early days of MassChallenge. I had been involved from the very first class of MassChallenge, and I've seen so many wonderful things come out of MassChallenge. And I'm actually really excited for all of you for this wild ride you are on, because it's going to be incredible. But today, I really want to talk about my book, First Pitch: Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup. And I think that what's important here is really the subtitle, because we're not just talking about pitching investors, and Eric covered a lot of that really brilliantly, but truly, you're going to be pitching all the time as a startup. It's a skill you need to master regardless of the industry or the stage you're in. You will be pitching from the very start all the way through every day in some way, whether it's for investment or employees or partners or early adopters or even customers. The way you pitch your company is really the key to success. So what I'm going to talk about today is a lot of what I learned in the course of my role as the executive director for the Blank Center for Entrepreneurship at Babson College. Babson is ranked #1 for entrepreneurship for over 25 years. So we've done a lot of this and we've seen a lot of this. Plus there's a whole bunch of research and interviews that I went through to write the book. And so there's a really great set of both very tactical about writing a compelling pitch and giving a compelling pitch, as well as some very strategic things around how to act in a pitch and some of the interpersonal dynamics that happen in a pitch. So I wrote this book because I really found that entrepreneurs were struggling with this very important skill. And I saw it in my work with the entrepreneurs that I work with in Babson, and my time as an advisor on boards, and working in MassChallenge as a mentor and Techstars. But time after time, they would say to me how overwhelmed they felt about the pitch process. And the truth is, it really shouldn't be something to dread. It should be exciting. You're getting to finally share this journey that you're on with everybody and get them to lean in and see if they want to come along with you. And so at first glance, you might look at this book and you would say, First Pitch is about pitching your startup. But the truth is actually yes and no. It turns out that entrepreneurs really need to learn about the pitch process for an investor presentation, but it's way more than that. It's about looking at how to build relationships and how to communicate about your startup in a variety of situations to a variety of audiences, so you can get the resources and help that you really need. So the investor pitch, or what we think of as the pitch, is really only one form of the kinds of things that you're developing and the work that you're doing as you create your pitch. So today I want to teach you a little about what I teach the entrepreneurs in my programs, and then a little bit more, as I said, around the interpersonal dynamics, because there are a lot of intangibles that make a pitch great. So first, let me tell you a story about Ravish Majithia. He's the founder and CEO of Magdemer. And he is a PhD materials engineer that came to Babson to get his MBA because he wanted to save the world. He had invented a magnetic ink that would actually make plastic packaging easier to recycle, so he could save the planet. And the problem was that he had no idea how to get anybody to pay attention to it. So Ravish, he used a presentation style that was understated or for lack of a better word, he was kind of nerdy in this wonderful PhD materials engineer kind of way. And when we first heard him start to pitch at Babson about his invention, we really had trouble following what he was saying. It felt a little flat and uninspired, but yet it was this incredible invention that was going to help solve a very horrible plastics problem. But he had a lot of jargon, a lot of technical specifications about the recycling process, and really a lot of insider speak that most people really wouldn't understand, and they wouldn't see how brilliant this is. But yet there really was a quadruple win across the board. It was great for consumers, it was great for the recycling, it was great for his company, and it was great for the people who made things in plastic packaging, like beverage manufacturers or other types of consumer packaged goods companies. So he presented his idea many times to us at Babson, and we worked with him over and over and over to try and really get his pitch to present in a way that would really inspire people and get them to be excited about what he was doing. And so towards the end of his time at Babson, he pitched his idea after our summer venture program to an auditorium of 400 people, and he absolutely crushed it. And then he got into MassChallenge, and he won at the end of MassChallenge the $50,000 Gold Award after pitching in front of 1,000 people. And the truth is that, you know, not much really had changed about what his invention really was. It wasn't that he had pivoted the business in any extraordinary way that would make people more interested in it. It was that he wasn't able to convey the importance of it, and he couldn't tell the story of the business. So if you think about it, like how many investors or partners would have passed on this world-changing invention because the pitch was bad? And so that data that investors were getting in terms of his ability to be a great founder was wrong. It was a false negative. So this is a great example of why it's so important for entrepreneurs to recognize that the pitch is way more than getting people to invest in your company. And Magmer is a wonderful example because Ravish has now gotten a paid pilot with one of the largest CPG beverage manufacturers in the country, because he was able to tell this story and communicate the unique value proposition that he had in a way that got people to lean in. And it's also a way for founders to show who you are as a person. So Eric just talked a lot about that idea where, you know, he's really interested in the founder first. He really wants to understand what that person is about and what it will be like to work together. And so your pitch is a great way to also show that. So one of the things that is related to this is this idea that stories sell. So I was a marketer for many, many years before I worked at Babson. And I learned that storytelling is a really important part of the pitch. Marketing and pitching are actually pretty similar because you're trying to get people to do something to change their behavior, trying to persuade them to act. And so the thing that storytelling does that's really helpful is it creates an emotional connection between you and your audience, and it can help them get to know you, some of the things we just talked about. So people actually love stories. Research says that our brains are wired to remember stories. So bringing your pitch alive with a story is important. And it shouldn't be this very kind of wide and amorphous story. A lot of times the story is about why you created this company or what you expect the world to look like when your creation has come to life. So it's generally a very personal story, or a story about an individual that shows the drama and the depth of the problem that you're trying to solve. But the other part about storytelling, because it is memorable, it helps other people remember what you said, so they think about you again, and they can also tell other people what you're about. And so by telling other people your story, you might find other people who want to be helpful. So there's this ripple effect. The other thing about storytelling is it puts people in listening mode versus sharing details and dry information in a pitch really puts them in evaluation mode. And when you're in evaluation mode, you're judging the idea and really looking for errors, versus being in storytelling mode, your brain is really just really listening and really paying attention. So making an emotional connection with the audience is really a big part of having a winning pitch. And you do this through storytelling. So here are some tips on that I've seen work really well. Things like choosing words that convey emotion. So an example here is Ring doorbell. So Jamie Siminoff created Ring doorbell. You probably know it is an online video doorbell. And the thing is that he went on Shark Tank. He talked about his incredible creation, his online video doorbell, and none of the sharks bit. Nobody really cared about an online video doorbell. But then when he started talking about Ring as really being core to neighborhood safety, then people really couldn't ignore what he was saying, because this idea of neighborhood safety is such a powerful image in your head. When I say that, you're probably seeing your own home, you're seeing your street, you're thinking about your family or your friends, you want them to be safe. So choosing words that kind of connect to emotion versus something very factual can help people lean in and start to feel something for what you're building. Another tip I give often is this show me, don't tell me narrative. This is around the idea where, think about if you were visiting a new city and you had never been there before, and I tell you to get on a tour bus and look at the city on the tour bus, see the buildings, and I'm going to walk you through the city and I'm going to show you all the incredible things about it. Now, think about if I just gave you a map of the city and I said, here's a map, check it out. The impression you're going to get of that city is completely different. It's not going to come to life in the same way. So show me, don't tell me is really this idea of bringing it to life in a visual way for people to think about in their heads. Using metaphors or words that create an image. The thing I use to explain this is this idea of, if I tell you I'm going to run 100 yards, you may or may not know how long 100 yards is, but if I say I'm going to go run the length of a football field, you immediately know sort of what that looks like. She's going to run the length of a football field. I can picture that in my head. So the difference there is this idea of you're using a metaphor for the same thing that people can really latch onto, they can visualize. And then last, you really want to take your listeners on a journey. There's this whole element of storytelling that's, starting at one place and rising the action and the drama to a climax where, things change, the problem is at its worst, and oh my gosh, here's your solution to create the transformation. So the journey is really this idea of an arc of a story where the world before becomes the world after, and somewhere in that ride, your solution, what you've created, makes all the difference to the new world. So one of the things I developed along the course of writing this book was this idea of a story flow. Sorry, I'm going to adjust my screen a little bit. Was a story flow. So I listened to I've listened to thousands of pitches in my time working with startups, and I really started to get a feel for this flow for your storytelling. So well, in my book, I do sort of walk you through a set of slides I think you should have in an investor presentation. But what I like so much more is this idea of having a flow for your talk track, because you're not always going to have the opportunity for slides to be shown, or you want to be ready to talk about your startup at any time. So having a flow in your head about how you're going to start to tell the story of your startup is really helpful. So I call this the 4H framework, and the idea is this. You start with your headline, and your headline is meant to really set the context for what you're going to be talking about, whether it's your industry or trying to show, get people to narrow in and focus on what you're about to talk about. Now, if you have slides, the headline is probably on the slide behind you on your first slide. And if you don't have slides, you probably want to say the headline in kind of a conversational way, like, today I'm going to talk to you about my startup that is, and then reveal the headline. From the headline, you've got people set, they're ready to hear your message, and you go into the heart section of your talk track. And that talk track is really about making them feel something. So a lot of these things that I just talked about in storytelling belong there, where you're trying to get the audience to lean in, you're trying to get them to empathize with the problem, really make it come to life for them and feel the drama in that problem and really feel compelled that it needs to get solved, and then revealing your solution to solve that problem. In the head section, you're telling people how it works. And so you're essentially anticipating all the questions that people have about your startup before they even ask them, as a result of telling your story about the problem and the solution. The head section is this very analytical how-to. This is how it works. It's an online platform. We get a percentage of revenue. However that may be, you're sort of explaining the business model, you're explaining the target market in a really strong way, you're explaining the traction that you have and why you believe it's evidence of product market fit or wherever, what stage you're going to next. And then you end with the hope section. And the hope section is kind of your big finish. It's this time where you're sort of leveling up from where you are in the trenches with your startup right now, and you're leveling up into this bigger space of where you hope your invention or your creation or the company that you're building is going to have an impact. It's this bigger idea of how you want the world to be different. And so that's the kind of the flow that you go through with your pitch. So I'm going to show you a quick example of this using Airbnb, because everybody kind of knows what Airbnb is, I think. And I actually found the Airbnb deck from when they started raising money way back in 08 or 09. And it followed this flow, which was kind of cool. So their headline, which was on the first slide behind them, was book rooms with locals rather than hotels. So immediately you know sort of where they're going to go, what Airbnb might be. It's about travel. It's about a substitute for a hotel. You know, now I'm intrigued. I want to understand what booking with a local might be doing for me. So that headline is getting your audience in the right frame of mind. Then in the heart section, if I was pitching it, I would tell a story about a really uninspired and expensive trip to Barcelona, building the drama and building this climax that I really, you know, didn't get to really see the real Barcelona because I was in the touristy section and I got duped into some touristy stuff that really wasn't showing me the true beautiful Barcelona that I had saved money years for to go to. And then in the head section, I would talk about the fact that it's an online platform. Airbnb gets a % of every booking. Budget travelers are a huge target market. So that was originally their target market, was budget travelers, and it was a huge market, but now it's even bigger than that. So it's a huge market, and kind of describe who's in there. So it's all those kinds of things that people have questions about how it works. And then the hope section of it is my big finish, again, where I'm going to talk about how travel is transformed and the world becomes more connected because people are staying with locals rather than hotels, and they're traveling around the world and having these incredible experiences that are truly genuine, truly authentic to the places that they're going. So that's how that flow works. And I think it's really helpful when you have time to do a longer pitch, like an investor pitch, or potentially in a pitch competition or a demo day. This flow can work really well, and you can kind of expand and contract it depending on how much time you have, and then but you still kind of cover those 4 sections in the course of the presentation. The other type of pitch that people ask me about a lot, and there are actually several kinds of pitches, but the other type of pitch that people ask me a lot about is the elevator pitch. And I'm not going to spend a ton of time trying to help you create your elevator pitch, but I will say this: it is extremely important because it's great when you can tell people what you're working on anytime, anywhere. It should be clear and succinct, no jargon. The whole point is not to give away every little detail about your business, but just enough to get them to ask the next question. So 20 to 30 seconds max. And so the way I help my students start to craft their elevator pitch is using this sentence structure. It's kind of like a Mad Libs for those of you who remember Mad Libs, where you're kind of filling in the blanks. But in reality, again, it's something that I learned in the marketing world as a marketer. It's actually a positioning statement that big companies use in order to create marketing for a new product or an innovation they're going to bring to the world. But I think it works really well as an elevator pitch. And as you get good at it, you can kind of relax into a version of this that works best for you. So don't feel constrained to say it exactly like this. But once you've really, played with the words that you're going to fill in those red spots, you can feel comfortable that you've kind of covered everything that needs to be in the elevator pitch. And I would say that the hardest part is that unique differentiator. That's where your unique value proposition lives. And that is one of the hardest things to really nail down because it's got to be truly unique to you. And the idea is that it's something that may connect to an emotional or social need that the consumer may not even know that they have. So the idea is that it's not really, it has to resonate in such a way that it's not factual, but that it's something that's a little emotional again. It's this idea that it's not about a feature that you have or what the product actually does, but it's like how it does it. And that is what your unique value proposition should be about. So this is a good structure for an elevator pitch, or at least to get you started in your sort of target market problem solution statements. And I would practice this all the time because it should come out of you like breathing. It should be so easy for you to say, and natural and not stilted, that you can do it anytime, anywhere. So I say this in my book about 1,000 times. Pitching is personal. It's so, so personal. And because of that, it's really important that you know your audience. Do research and understand the motivations. It can make a huge difference in how it's received. So something like what Erica was talking about, make sure you know, if you're pitching a seed stage VC, make sure you know what stage they invest in, what industries they like, what's their thesis, do they lead rounds or not? These kinds of questions about how they run their fund or how they invest, where else they've invested before. Maybe find common ways to connect with them personally. Maybe you could find a way that you have something in common that you could talk about in sort of a small talk kind of way to start to begin to build a relationship with them and help them get to know you. Maybe you both grew up in a rural town and you can talk about that and what that's like, or maybe you have the same nonprofit passion about teaching children to read. It could be almost anything, but the point is to do really good research, ask people who might know that person, look on LinkedIn, look at their social media, what do they talk about a lot, and see if you can find ways to connect that are beyond sort of showing them your business. Again, it's building a relationship. You're trying to show the kind of founder you would be and how much fun it would be to work with you. The thing about doing your research, I think that also is emphasized in the book, is this idea that each meeting is an opportunity to learn and to improve. So it's really important to remember that if it doesn't work out exactly as you had planned, you still want to leave behind a really good impression, because you never know who might take an interest in your company later, or they'll keep following you and then maybe the time to invest comes along, or they know someone who could be a great advisor for you. So people generally do want to be helpful to entrepreneurs if they can. And so give them that opportunity to be helpful to you by, showing the type of founder you would be and showing what you value and who you are. I know Eric talked about the kinds of entrepreneurs he likes to invest in. He talked about it in like personal qualities. And I heard this time and time again with the VCs that I interviewed and the angel investors that I interviewed for my book. They want to know the person sitting in front of them before they even go one step into the deck. They want to know who you are as a founder and gauge what type of founder you're going to be, because they want to work with the best founders. They want to work with strategic thinkers, people who have that it factor, who can create a movement around what they're building and people will follow. So it's really important that you recognize that this personal dynamic is extremely important. Related to this is this idea of coachability. And this is something I think entrepreneurs may not know, is that coachability really matters. And it's the idea that you're open to feedback and other people's ideas, but also being thoughtful about what you're hearing and showing it with your body language and your behavior. So again, you're going to get tons of feedback all along the way. And the point is that you don't have to take and act on every piece of feedback, but you do need to value it. You need to show that the person who gave you feedback, it was valuable to you, you listened to it, you understood it. And the way you do that is through your body language and active listening. So there's a lot of research actually on coachability with early stage entrepreneurs. And it turns out that it's one of the biggest components of being perceived as trustworthy. And studies show that entrepreneurs who are perceived as trustworthy are much more likely to receive investment offers. Early stage investors see their potential expert advisor role as important as, or even more important than, their role as a monetary contributor. So they want to know you're going to be someone great to work with. Another study showed that the more willing an entrepreneur is to accept feedback and engage with suggestions offered, not necessarily take them, but engage with them and talk about them, the more interested investors are in supporting the companies. This is data-based research that says that this is statistically significant, and it is very, very true. And another study showed that coachability correlates positively with investor interest and willingness to recommend to others to invest. So these are, this is just to emphasize how important coachability matters. And on the slide here is really a few ways to demonstrate that you're coachable. In crushing the Q&A, you should know your numbers, anticipate questions, and don't react defensively when you're pushed on an assumption or someone really questions something that you think is correct. I've seen this happen before. In one investor meeting, the entrepreneur started to back up as he was getting defensive through his statements, but also in his body language. He started to back up as defensive until he actually hit the wall behind him. And it was just a bad look for that entrepreneur who had done a great job pitching, but really blew it in the Q&A because he really proved himself to be not a very coachable person. Active listening is this idea of engaging with feedback using verbal and nonverbal cues. Getting to yes and is this idea of building on ideas. So instead of saying no to something, you say yes and the and is your opportunity to build on that idea further and maybe shape it a little to where you would like it to be. And then of course, following up on feedback. Again, like I said before, write it down, circle back, integrate it into your next round of feedback into your deck if you think it's valuable, if you think it's right. So coachability is really important. I also wanted to quickly touch on this idea of bias, and someone asked it in the last session towards the very end, and I know that there's just so much conversation about bias in startup world right now. And the truth is that the entrepreneurial journey today is actually quite biased along the way to success, and much of it is subconscious, I'm sure, but regardless, it really does happen quite a lot. We know that women get 2% of the venture funding, but own 38% of the businesses in the United States. We know that Black founders make up 1% of venture funded startups, yet are 13% of the population. So research tells us that there are a few reasons for it. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is just this idea there aren't a lot of women and people of color that are investors. And so that's a big problem. It's not just that there are entrepreneurs. There are plenty of women and people of color who are entrepreneurs, but the problem really starts at back in the funnel where there aren't enough of them being investors. And the problem with that is that people have this unconscious need to invest in people who are like themselves. So if most venture capitalists and investors are white males, they will generally want to invest in white men. In other words, sometimes investors have expectations about pitches that go beyond the content. When they see an entrepreneur that's different, on the outside from the stereotype of a successful entrepreneur, which is often a white male, this can make it more difficult for an entrepreneur who's a woman or a person of color to convince the investor of their value of their venture. And so until we have more investors, there's still going to be an imbalance there. So what I like to tell entrepreneurs is spot it and switch it. Be really aware when you're in a situation, you're pitching or you're talking to someone about your business and you're noticing that there's a subtle bias kind of creeping into the conversation. So the best thing you can do in that moment is to try and take control of the conversation and move it in a direction that favors your perspective. So that's spot it and switch it. So the first one on the top of here is the idea that like is attracted to like. So demonstrate the advantage of being different through the unique insight. So investors and people who work with startups are always looking for the person who has the most unique insight because those are the people who will win. Maybe you have insight into a certain demographic or target market that nobody else has, or maybe you have an insight to a certain set of trends that are going to collide and create a market opportunity. And it's only because you are unique that you are seeing that. So emphasize that kind of thing. Or let's say you're working in a specialty market or a female type of problem that you're trying to address, like Sarah Blakely did with Spanx, and she was doing shapewear, or it's hair care, or it's nursing products, anything that has to do with a really female problem. Or even in the Black market, we have a entrepreneur who's a Babson grad. His name's Rich Dennis, and he started a hair care and skincare company primarily for Black women. But he talks about a lot how, talking to investors that aren't Black really don't understand the scope of that problem, but he could very much showcase the opportunity because it's a massive target market. So really just get them to focus on the opportunity, how big that market is. I also hear about mom or lifestyle comments, you have 3 kids, how can you be an entrepreneur? I always say just turn it to your badass self and talk about how you get more done before 8 a.m. than most people do. Things that, being a mom has made me a better entrepreneur. We're the most organized people on the planet. And then last, and this is a tough one, is this listen for prevention question and flip it to a promotion answer. So a promotion question is this idea of growth and vision and opportunity. A typical promotion question would be something like, what are your plans for growing your business? And a prevention version of that might be something about your tactical plans to stave off doom. So something like, how are you going to manage risk? And in the study done by Columbia University, where they sort of identified this dynamic of prevention versus promotion, is what they found that venture capitalists, both male and female, mind you, tended to ask men more promotion questions, while they tended to ask women more prevention questions. And so what kind of question you get asked really matters, because entrepreneurs who are asked mainly promotion questions raise on average 7 times more money than those who are asked mainly prevention questions. So you need to switch it. Switch it and move it into how you're going to win. And then the last thing I wanted to just quickly mention is this idea for building relationships. These are a few tactics that we talk about building relationships. Eric talked about the importance of warm intros. I love to talk to my students about update emails, a quarterly email where you kind of give where you're going and how much progress you've made and some update on your KPIs. Anybody that you meet or pitch to, get their email and start adding them to your quarterly email address. Ask them. That's a great ask to make if they're not interested in really pursuing anything right now. Say, can I put you on my email list? I'd love to keep you in the loop of what we're doing. Offer help. Be helpful to people. It's a wonderful way to build a relationship. Don't just be a taker, be a giver. And that's a really important part of being part of an entrepreneurial community. And then, of course, authenticity. Be genuine. Don't be something you're not. People will find this out. So you definitely do not want to be a pretender. It will come back to bite you. So show your personality, show your values, and help them get to know the real you.
Debbie,
I have some stuff on online pitching, Kate, but I think I'll skip it instead so that we can get to questions.
Debbie, thank you so much. We may have come to time already. The time went so quickly, but I know we have a number of questions in the chat box. Maybe just one briefly, if our startups don't mind running a little over, which was around adapting to the virtual environment. There were a number of questions specifically on making that transition.
Sure. Love to answer that question. And that's a question I'm getting asked all the time. I mean, I wrote the book and it came out, it was finished in February, like right before COVID. And so if I had more time or I had a different time, I probably would have added a chapter on online pitching because it is very different. Definitely stand up when you pitch online. It makes a big difference in your body language and the kind of energy you're projecting. Make sure you check your tech way before you're presenting, that you know what tech you're using, where you're supposed to be, sign on early. Practice Q&A in a virtual setting. It's very difficult to do. It's much harder. Make sure you are very comfortable with that. Control your background is another one. I was on a pitch, I was watching a pitch recently, and the entrepreneur had his laundry basket in the back full of dirty laundry, and he didn't realize it, obviously, and everybody has laundry. It's not like it's the end of the world, but check your background. Make sure your background is plain, it's natural. Check your sound, that you're not going to be disturbed by other people. And then just generally revisit your pitch. I think I found that a shorter pitch online is better, but use more slides. I know that sounds a little counterintuitive, but cover less content, but use more slides so that you are changing the slide more often. It keeps people, renewing their attention to what you're talking about. So those are some tips, but definitely the process is slower online and getting to know people, because again, it's all so much about relationships and getting to know people personally. So if you only have online to do that right now, it is going to take longer, but it absolutely can be done, and it can be done great. I know several people who just recently closed rounds and it was all done online, and it just takes time and putting your best foot forward and helping them get to know you as a founder.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I know we could probably spend the rest of the afternoon with you, so we will likely be following up to see if we can't convince you to come back later. I think.
Okay, great. And buy the book. The book has so much more in it. Lots of tactical help and lots of ways to show you how to pitch all the different startup stakeholders you're going to come across in your journey.
Great. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Yeah, absolutely. It was so much fun. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Take care.